What if I told you there is a tree that produces over 400 pounds of food every single year? It requires no replanting. It needs no fertilizer. And for 3,000 years, it fed entire civilizations across the Pacific. Then, in less than 2 centuries, we erased it from the global food system. We replaced it with annual crops that demand constant labor, water, and money. But across forgotten islands, it never stopped growing. It simply waited. This is the story of the food we abandoned just before the world began running out of options. Imagine a tree that, once planted, feeds your family for 50 years. Not a fragile crop that must be seeded every spring. Not a grain that demands irrigation, fertilizer, and the constant risk of failure. A single tree, towering 80 feet high, that produces 200 fruits in a season without asking anything in return. No tilling, no weeding, no annual seed purchases, just harvest after harvest, year after year, generation after generation. A single tree can yield up to 450 pounds of food every growing season. That is more calories than an acre of wheat produces in a year, more than soybeans, more than corn in most tropical conditions. And it does this with almost no labor. Now consider the question that should haunt every agricultural planner on Earth. If a tree this productive exists, if it has existed for millennia, why does almost no one outside the Pacific know its name? Why was it never made the foundation of global food systems? The answer is not about nutrition. It is not about yield. The answer is about something far more uncomfortable. The tree was too independent. And independent food does not build empires. This is the breadfruit, scientifically known as Artocarpus altilis, a towering evergreen native to New Guinea and the islands of the Western Pacific. It was domesticated over 3,000 years ago by Polynesian voyagers who carried it across the ocean, island to island, as they settled the vast blue expanse of Oceania. The tree grows fast, reaching fruit production within 3 to 5 years. Once mature, it lives for 50 years or more, producing anywhere from 100 to 200 fruits annually. Each fruit weighs between 2 and 10 pounds, with dense, starchy flesh that can be roasted, boiled, fried, or dried into flour. But the true power of breadfruit lies in its permanence. This was not a seasonal crop requiring annual planting. It was a living food system, rooted in the ground for generations. Polynesian families would plant a breadfruit tree when a child was born, ensuring that child would have food for life. The tree would outlive them both. In the Pacific, it was more than agriculture. It was inheritance. It was continuity. And it was exactly the kind of food system that would later be dismantled. For the island societies of Polynesia, Micronesia, and Melanesia, breadfruit was the backbone of daily existence. In places like Tahiti and the Marquesas, it served as the primary staple, more important than taro, more reliable than fishing. The fruit could be prepared in dozens of ways: roasted over an open flame until the flesh turned soft and fragrant, boiled and mashed into thick pastes, sliced and fried, fermented in leaf-lined pits where it would keep for months, even years, developing a sour taste prized for flavoring fresher preparations. In times of abundance, entire harvests were buried underground. Some of these storage pits remained edible for over 20 years. 1 acre of breadfruit trees can produce over 8 million calories per year, enough to feed nearly 10 people. That yield, combined with the tree's 50-year lifespan, meant that a single grove could support a village across multiple generations. No annual replanting, no risk of total crop failure, just food, waiting on the branch. This was not agriculture as Europeans understood it, and systems built on control rarely tolerate food systems that cannot be owned. Consider what breadfruit offers compared to the grains that dominate modern agriculture. Wheat, rice, and corn must be planted every season, They require prepared soil, irrigation systems, fertilizers, and constant labor. They demand storage infrastructure. They are vulnerable to drought, flood, and pest. And every year, farmers must purchase new seed or save seed from the harvest under careful conditions. Breadfruit defies that entire model. It does not need annual replanting. It requires no large machinery for cultivation. A single tree can outproduce an entire field of grain over its lifetime. It grows with minimal water once established. It fixes no nitrogen but demands little from the soil, and it thrives with almost no care at all. In short, breadfruit creates independence. Communities that rely on it do not need to buy seed. They do not depend on fertilizer companies. They do not require centralized grain storage. A family with a few breadfruit trees can feed itself for generations without ever entering a marketplace. And that independence is precisely what made it dangerous to systems built on dependency. If you want more forgotten histories like this one, consider subscribing to keep these stories alive. In the late 1700s, European colonial powers looked at breadfruit and saw something remarkable, a food that could keep enslaved populations alive without the cost of imported grain. British botanist Joseph Banks accompanied Captain James Cook to Tahiti in 1769. He observed the breadfruit and immediately recognized its value for the sugar plantations of the Caribbean, where enslaved Africans were dying from malnutrition and overwork. Banks convinced King George III to fund an expedition. The goal was simple: transport breadfruit from the Pacific to Jamaica and feed Britain's slaves for free. The first attempt aboard the HMS Bounty ended in mutiny. The crew threw the plants overboard along with Captain William Bligh. Bligh survived. He returned to England and launched a second voyage. In 1793, he arrived in Jamaica with 678 surviving breadfruit trees. The irony is bitter. The very qualities that made breadfruit perfect for feeding enslaved people, its low labor requirements, its permanence, its independence from markets, were the same qualities that made colonial administrators uneasy. A population that could feed itself without imported food was harder to control. Breadfruit did not require plantation infrastructure. It did not generate export revenue. It provided autonomy instead of profit. Even after Bligh delivered his trees, the Caribbean rejected them. Enslaved people refused to eat the unfamiliar fruit. They fed it to pigs. It took over 40 years before breadfruit was widely accepted, and by then slavery had been abolished. But the deeper erasure happened across the tropics. Colonial agriculture favored sugar, rice, and export crops. Plantation systems demanded annual planting cycles that could be taxed, monitored, and controlled. Breadfruit trees were cut down to make room for cash crops. Indigenous food systems were dismissed as primitive. The very permanence of breadfruit became a liability in economies designed around annual extraction. Over time, a tree that had fed civilizations for 3,000 years was written out of modern agricultural planning. It received almost no research funding. It was excluded from international food programs. And for generations, the world forgot that a single tree could feed a family for life, because forgetting made the system easier to manage. Now the world is remembering. In 2022, researchers at Northwestern University published a study that stunned agricultural planners. While climate models predict devastating yield losses for rice, wheat, corn, and soybeans, breadfruit remains almost entirely unaffected. Under both moderate and extreme warming scenarios, suitable growing regions for breadfruit decline by less than 5%. In some areas, including sub-Saharan Africa, cultivation could expand dramatically. Scientists now call it a climate-resilient superfood. It is high in fiber, rich in vitamins and essential amino acids, and requires almost no irrigation once established. Organizations like the Breadfruit Institute are distributing trees across Africa, the Caribbean, and Central America. Farmers in Haiti, Jamaica, and Hawaii are rediscovering what Pacific Islanders never forgot. In some cultures, there is a tradition to plant a breadfruit tree when a child is born, ensuring that child will have food for the rest of their life. The tree was never obsolete. It was inconvenient. It did not fit the economics of control. It did not generate recurring revenue. It simply grew year after year, offering its fruit to anyone willing to harvest it. The knowledge was never lost. It was only ignored. And now, as the crops we built our systems around begin to fail, the tree that feeds you for life is still standing, still bearing fruit, still waiting for us to remember what the Pacific always knew.